I can't breathe in this house anymore. The words kept echoing in Daniel's mind as he turned into the gated driveway of his glass and marble mansion in the hills. From the outside, everything screamed success: 3 floors of polished stone, a heated pool, a designer playground in the garden, luxury cars lined up like trophies. Inside, though, it felt less like a home and more like a storm that never ended. Daniel was a tech CEO, the kind of man who closed million-dollar deals before lunch and answered emails at red lights. But nothing in his career had prepared him for Noah, Leo, and Mia, his 3-year-old triplets with lungs like sirens and tempers to match. The pediatrician had warned him 3 toddlers at once meant triple the work, triple the crying, triple the exhaustion. What no one explained was what it would do to a marriage. Laura, his wife, had tried. Through a brutal pregnancy, a traumatic birth, and endless nights semi-conscious on the nursery floor, she forced herself to keep going. Until one morning 7 months ago, she folded. She left a letter, a few lines smudged with tears, and disappeared to another country to save what was left of herself. Since then, 5 professional nannies with perfect resumes had come and gone, each one lasting mere weeks before quitting in tears, claiming the children were impossible. And so the mansion stayed immaculate on the outside, but behind those expensive doors lived a father on the edge. 3 little souls starving for presence, and a silence that felt heavier than any amount of noise. The silence hit Daniel first, a thick, unsettling quiet that didn't belong in a house that usually shook with tantrums, crying, and tiny footsteps. He froze in the doorway, keys still dangling from his hand. Something was wrong. Silence was never good. Noah, Leo, Mia, he called out, forcing steadiness into a voice that trembled anyway. Nothing. He hurried across the living room, scattered with toys, past the TV, still playing a looping cartoon no one was watching. His pulse spiked. The last nanny had quit just that morning, stormed out, really swearing she would never return. But even she wouldn't leave 3 toddlers alone. Then he heard it. Not crying, not screaming, laughter, soft, bright, impossible. It drifted from the kitchen like a memory of something he once hoped his home could be. Daniel followed it, almost afraid it would disappear if he walked too fast. And then he stopped dead in the doorway. Standing at the marble counter was Camilla, the housekeeper he hired only to clean hair in a messy bun, face dusted with flower apron tied over her simple clothes. And around her, perched on stools like little chefs, were his children. Noah's small hands were buried in cookie dough. Leo was licking melted chocolate off his fingers. Mia giggled as she shaped lopsided hearts and stars. They were calm. They were happy. They were safe. Daniel gripped the doorframe to steady himself. He had never seen them like this, not once in the chaotic months since Laura left. Camilla turned, startled, wiping her face, only to smear the flour more. For a split second, she looked like a child caught doing something wrong. I didn't expect you home so early, Mr. Daniel, she said. Before he could reply, Mia spotted him and squealed, "Daddy." "Look, we're making cookies." Her chocolate-stained smile hit him like a punch straight to the chest. Something was happening in his own home. Something he didn't understand. Something he hadn't been able to give his own children. For a moment, Daniel could only stare, stunned by the impossible calm in front of him. These were the same children who just hours earlier had turned breakfast into a battlefield. The same little ones who had driven 5 trained nannies to tears. The same trio his own mother refused to babysit for more than 2 hours. Yet here they were, laughing, creating, breathing freely, as if someone had finally opened a window in a house long suffocating. Camilla untied her flour-stained apron nervously. "Mr. Daniel, the nanny." She left. Again. Just walked out. The kids were terrified, locked in their room, crying so hard they couldn't breathe. Her voice wavered. "I know it wasn't my place to step in. I'm hired to clean, not to care for them." But they were shaking, calling for someone, anyone. So I stayed. "And made cookies?" Daniel asked before he could filter the sharpness in his tone. Camilla straightened. For the first time, she didn't look like an employee. She looked like a woman defending 3 frightened children. "No," she said softly but firmly. "I comforted them, held them until they stopped trembling, fed them because they were scared and hungry. The cookies came later. They needed safety before anything else." The room went still. Daniel looked at his kids, really looked. Mia's arms were wrapped around his leg, leaving chocolate fingerprints on his expensive trousers. Leo held up a misshapen blob proudly. Noah, usually the most restless, simply watched his father with quiet eyes that mirrored Daniel's own. "Camilla, how did you calm them so fast?" he whispered. She met his gaze with a gentleness that felt disarming. "Maybe," she said, "because I wanted them to stop crying, not for my sanity, but for theirs." And in that simple truth, Daniel felt something inside him crack an ache he had ignored for far too long. Daniel's question hung in the air, heavy, trembling, unbearably honest. When was the last time he had truly looked at his children? Not through security camera footage on his phone. Not through updates from exhausted nannies, but with his own eyes, his own presence. Mia tugged at his tie again. "Daddy, taste mine. I made it for you." Her voice was so bright, so sure it nearly broke him. Daniel loosened his tie and lowered himself onto a stool, something he hadn't done in months. The marble felt cold beneath his hands, but his daughter's small weight against his chest felt overwhelmingly warm. He took a bite of her half-raw cookie, forcing a smile, even as the taste hit him like wet cement. "It's perfect," he whispered. Perfect because she had made it, perfect because she was smiling, perfect because for the first time in far too long he was here. Camilla watched him quietly, uncertainty flickering across her face, as if she wasn't sure whether to step back into the role of housekeeper or stay where compassion had placed her. Daniel sensed the hesitation and shook his head gently. "You don't have to leave," he murmured, surprising even himself. I just need to understand what happened today," she swallowed. "What happened, Mr. Daniel, is that they were alone, scared, and someone needed to show them they weren't." Her words pierced deeper than she intended, straight into the hollow space Daniel had been avoiding for months. He looked again at his children. Noah finally calm. Leo proudly holding his lumpy masterpiece. Mia clinging to him, as though afraid he might vanish again. What had he missed? How many moments like this had slipped through his fingers while he chased meetings, deadlines? Success, a truth he had refused to face, finally rose to the surface. It wasn't the children who were impossible. It was the absence he had mistaken for parenting. And now, sitting in a messy kitchen dusted with flour and hope, Daniel felt the weight of that realization settle into his chest. Painful, necessary, utterly transforming. Camilla hesitated when Daniel asked the question, the one that had been pressing against his ribs since he stepped into that kitchen of flour and laughter. "How did you do it?" he whispered. "How did you calm them?" 5 nannies couldn't. I couldn't. Camilla didn't answer right away. She brushed stray crumbs from the counter more to collect herself than to clean. When she finally lifted her gaze, there was something deeper in her eyes, something fragile, weathered, human. "I didn't follow a manual," she said softly. "I didn't use a technique. I just listened to their fear." Daniel frowned, not at her, but at himself, at the truth he already sensed was coming. "When I walked in," Camilla continued, "Noah was hyperventilating. Leo had thrown up from crying. Mia was burning with what we call emotional fever. They weren't misbehaving, Mr. Daniel. They were terrified." She swallowed. "And terror doesn't need discipline. It needs a lap to fall into." Her voice wavered just slightly. Daniel felt it like a tremor in the floor beneath them. "I opened my arms," she said, and said, "Come here. Let me take care of you." That's all. They didn't need perfection. They needed a person. Daniel's breath caught. A person, not a system, not a nanny with credentials, not another set of cameras or schedules. Someone willing to sit on the floor and hold them through the storm. He looked at Camilla, really seeing her for the first time. She stood there in an apron dusted with flour, but her presence filled the room with something money had never been able to buy: steadiness. "And what about you?" Daniel asked quietly. Why do you care so much?" For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. A flicker of old pain crossed her face, raw and unguarded. Because she whispered, "I know what it feels like to be a child who needs someone, and no one comes." The sentence dropped between them like a stone in deep water, rippling through everything Daniel thought he understood about her, and about himself. The room fell into a fragile stillness after Camila's confession, one of those pauses where even the air seems to hold its breath. Daniel felt something in him shift, the kind of shift that happens only when a truth too heavy, too raw, finally steps into the light. He pulled out a chair, suddenly unsure whether to sit or stand. "Camila, what happened to you?" His voice came out low, almost apologetic, afraid to push too far, yet unable to stop himself. Camila didn't flinch. Instead, she exhaled a long, quiet breath that sounded like it had been trapped inside her for years. "I grew up in a shelter," she began, eyes fixed on the cookie dough smeared across the counter. "My mother left me there when I was 4. She struggled with addiction and couldn't keep me. I spent years waiting every birthday, every holiday, hoping she'd walk through the door." A small, heartbreaking smile tugged at her lips. She never did. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He didn't know this woman, not really, but suddenly he felt connected to her pain in a way he couldn't explain. "I was lucky," she continued. "A family adopted me when I was 12. They taught me kindness, structure, what a safe home feels like." Her voice softened. But love never erased the memory of that little girl waiting with her suitcase by the door. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice trembled with a different kind of grief, older, deeper. "But the worst part wasn't my childhood," she swallowed. "It was losing my son." Daniel's breath hitched. The world seemed to narrow around her trembling hands. "His name was Lucas," she whispered. "He was 5. Smart, funny, loved dinosaurs. Just like Leo." Her eyes glistened. "He died from pneumonia. 1 week he was dancing around the living room, the next, gone." A tear rolled down her cheek, falling onto the countertop like a tiny, devastating truth. "So when your children cried today," Camila said, wiping her face with the back of her hand for a moment, "it felt like Lucas was calling for me again. And I couldn't ignore them." Daniel stood frozen, heart cracking open in a way he hadn't known was possible. In front of him wasn't just a housekeeper, it was a woman who had carried more loss than most people could survive, and still chose love. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Grief had its own gravity, and Daniel felt himself pulled into the orbit of Camila's pain, quiet, heavy, but strangely full of light. She had lost more than he could fathom, yet she was standing in his kitchen teaching his children how to laugh again, teaching him how to breathe again. "Camila!" He didn't know what else to say. No apology, no sympathy felt big enough, honest enough, worthy enough. But she shook her head gently, wiping the last tears from her cheeks. "You don't need to say anything. I've spent 2 years learning how to live with the silence that comes after loss." Her voice steadied, though her hands still trembled slightly. "But your kids, they pulled something alive out of me today. Something I thought I'd buried with Lucas." Daniel's chest tightened. He looked at the scattered flour, the messy bowls, the chocolate fingerprints across the counter. Evidence of chaos, yes, but also of life, of connection, of a moment he didn't know he was starving for. "How do you do that?" he asked softly. "How do you carry so much pain and still show up with so much love?" Camila gave a small breath of a laugh, fragile, real. "Because love is the only way I know to keep him close. Every time I comfort a child, every time I help them feel safe, it's like Lucas is still here living through the tenderness I offer." The words struck him like sunlight after months of darkness. Before he could respond, tiny footsteps pattered toward them. Mia peeked around the corner, her curls bouncing, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy, is Cammy sad?" "Did you make her sad?" Daniel crouched to her level. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups cry because they miss someone they love." Mia seemed to consider that. Then she toddled over to Camilla, climbed onto her lap, and placed a warm, chubby hand on her cheek. "It's okay. You can sit with us. We don't leave people alone." Camilla's breath broke. Daniel felt his own do the same. And in that instant, 3 wounded souls learning to heal through presence rather than perfection, something in the house shifted. Something began to mend. That evening, long after the flour had settled, and the laughter from the kitchen drifted into quiet hums around the house, Daniel found himself sitting on the nursery floor somewhere he hadn't been in months. The room felt different tonight. Not because the furniture had moved, not because the lights were softer, but because something in him had shifted. Camilla stood in the doorway for a moment, watching, as Mia curled up in his lap. Leo leaned into his side, and Noah traced circles on his arm with tiny, sleepy hands. Daniel didn't realize tears had filled his eyes until one slipped free and landed on Noah's hair. He didn't wipe it away. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted quietly, voice trembling. "I don't know how to be the father they deserve." Camilla walked in, moving slowly, as if she understood that his confession was a fragile thing that might crack if handled too quickly. She knelt beside him, her presence grounding, gentle. "You don't need to know everything," she said softly. "You just need to be here." Daniel let out a shaky breath. "But I'm scared, terrified that I'll mess them up." "Every parent is scared," Camilla replied. "But the fact that you're afraid means you care. And caring is the beginning of everything." The words wrapped around him like a blanket, warm, steady anchoring. Before he could respond, Leo lifted his head, blinking sleepily. "Daddy? Will you stay until we fall asleep?" Daniel swallowed hard. "I'll stay," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Camilla smiled, small, tender, proud. They sat in silence as the triplets drifted off, their breathing deepening in unison. And Daniel, for the first time in 7 long, aching months, felt something he hadn't felt in this house since before the storm began. He felt like a father. And maybe, just maybe, this was how healing started, not in grand gestures, but in small moments where someone finally chooses to stay. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains of the once sterile living room, landing softly on the toys scattered across the floor, evidence of a home, slowly remembering how to breathe. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Camilla pour juice into tiny cups while the triplets chased each other around her legs. Their laughter filled the house like music, warm and alive, and for the first time in months it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like grace, but as he watched them, watched her, an ache bloomed inside his chest. A realization heavy enough to bend him in half. He had poured money into every corner of his children's lives, elite daycare, nutritionists, cameras in every room, shelves of untouched toys, experts with impressive titles. Yet all those things had solved nothing. They were distractions, comfortable disguises hiding the truth he now couldn't escape. He had been absent, not cruelly, not intentionally, but consistently. Camilla noticed the shift on his face. "Daniel," she asked softly. He swallowed the guilt rising so fast it nearly burned. "I spent so much money trying to fix something that didn't cost anything," he whispered. "I thought structure professionals, all the best tools, would compensate for everything I wasn't giving them." "And what's that?" Camilla asked gently. He said the word cracking in the middle. "They needed me." She stepped closer, studying him with that same quiet steadiness that had soothed his children hours earlier. "You can't change the days you missed," she said, "but you can choose the ones you won't miss anymore." He looked at Noah, Leo, and Mia, 3 tiny souls who had begged for presence, while he offered perfection. Then he looked at Camilla, the woman who had walked into their chaos carrying nothing but empathy loss and an instinct to love. "Teach me," he said, voice trembling with resolve. "Teach me everything you know." Camilla nodded, not with triumph, but with hope. And right there in a messy kitchen, filled with sunshine and second chances, Daniel made the quiet, life-altering decision that would rewrite every chapter still unwritten. He would learn. He would show up. He would be present. At any cost. The first lesson came that very night. Bath time. Camilla had warned him gently. It might get chaotic. Don't panic. But nothing could have prepared Daniel for the small hurricane that unfolded the moment he announced, "I'll do it. Let me try." Noah immediately tossed a rubber dinosaur into the tub with the force of a professional pitcher. Leo stripped off his shirt and threw it directly at Daniel's face. Mia insisted she could swim, which in her vocabulary meant splashing water hard enough to soak the hallway. And Daniel, still wearing his tailored slacks and polished shoes, stepped into the bathroom like a man walking into battle. Within 2 minutes, his shirt was drenched. Within 5, his hair was dripping soap. Within 10, he was laughing, really laughing, while Leo covered his head in enough bubbles to resemble a collapsing snowman. "Daddy, you don't know how to do anything," Mia declared with brutal honesty. "No," Daniel admitted, water running down his cheeks, "but I'm learning." Camilla stood in the doorway, smiling softly, not intervening, not correcting, just witnessing the birth of something new. A father in the making. Later in the kids' bedroom, the triplets climbed into their identical beds, eyes wide with the expectancy of children who finally believed their father might stay. "Tell us a story," Leo begged. Daniel froze. He didn't know any. Not the way Camilla did. "Make one up," she whispered. So he did. A ridiculous story about a clumsy dragon who couldn't breathe fire and needed 3 brave children to show him how to try again. The triplets interrupted him a dozen times to fix details, add characters, and argue about the dragon's color, but they were smiling. The house felt warm. When they finally drifted to sleep, Daniel sat on the floor between their beds, a quiet promise forming inside him, steady, sacred, unshakable. Presence wasn't a talent, it wasn't a gift, it was a choice, and tonight he had chosen right. That night, when the hallway finally went quiet, and the triplets drifted into the soft rhythm of sleep, Daniel stepped into the corridor with a feeling he hadn't known in years: peace. Not the polished artificial peace of silence, but the living kind. The kind built from presence, from chaos, from love, that didn't need to be perfect, to be real. Camilla started to slip away toward the guest room, but Daniel stopped her gently. "Wait," he said. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with decision. "I need to ask you something important." She turned, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not just tonight. Not just when things fall apart. I want you to be their full-time caregiver. I'll triple your salary. Offer anything you need." He took a breath, letting the truth rise. "And I want you to teach me how to be their father for real this time." Camilla blinked, stunned. Then slowly, a tender smile formed. "I'll help," she whispered. "But only if you promise one thing." "Anything. Cancel at least 3 meetings a week," she said softly. "Choose them, even when it's inconvenient. Especially then." Daniel nodded, the weight of the promise settling beautifully in his chest. For the first time in months, he felt like he wasn't just surviving fatherhood, he was stepping into it. Sometimes the solution isn't a new expert, a new plan, or a bigger paycheck. Sometimes the solution is you, your presence, your warmth, your willingness to sit on the floor and be part of the mess. Because children don't need perfect parents. They need present ones. And healing often begins the moment we finally choose to show up. Before you go, tell me in the comments, what moment in your life taught you the true meaning of presence? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this chapter touched something in your heart, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs this reminder, because maybe, just maybe, this was the story meant for you today.